Live.
Welcome. This is the Natural Resources and the Senate Transportation Committee. It is what it is today.
It is the
Six.
The 6th of February, and we are here as a joint committee because there's a lot in the issue of the progress and implementation of standards for clean vehicles that bumps up against both committees. And from my vantage point, when you look at the Senate Transportation Committee, 4 of the 5 of us are brand new for this term on the committee. Some of us has some history on there, but haven't spent the last few years there. So 4 of our committee is weren't there the last 2 years. So, and there's a lot of interest in this issue. And we're really here to learn what the facts are. And we know there's a lot of opinions around this, but for us, this is meant to be an update. What have we agreed to? What's the process? All of that. And the senator from Washington and I talked about doing this jointly because any decisions of any kind or any discussion that went on, we have to work. Yeah.
Figured it would be good for us to be hearing the same information at the same time. And yeah, just want to echo what the senator from Memorial was saying about, this is an opportunity for us to learn and ask clarifying questions. And I think there'll be other opportunities to have more in-depth conversation. And similarly, 4 out of 5 of our committee is also new to the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. So anyway, we're thrilled that you are here. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Chair Watson. Thank you, Chair Westby.
Should we do a round of introductions first?
That would be probably good. Last one in, first one out.
Progress in the Bennington District.
Pat Brennan from the Grand Isle District.
Terry Williams, Senator for Rutland County.
This is Edbridge, Westmoreland, Wild.
Ann Watson, Washington.
Becca White, Windsor County.
Andrew Pertzler, Washington District.
Morning, I'm Ruth Hardy from the Addison District.
Hello, Wendy Harrison, Wyndham District.
And Senator Beck Caledonia will be joining us a little bit later.
Well, thank you, Chair Westman. Thank you, Chair Watson. I'm Jane Zorchek. I lead the Climate Action Office, which is in the Secretary's Office of the Agency of Natural Resources. I'm joined by Rachel Stevens, who's with the Office of General Counsel in the Agency of Natural Resources. We're also joined online by Deirdre Ritzer, who actually hasn't been admitted. Is it okay, Megan? Would it be okay if I admit Deirdre Ritzer?
Oh, we're sending Deirdre a message.
Oh,
Questioning.
who she is. Deirdre. Yeah.
She's here.
She's our colleague. Yeah.
It's okay to listen.
That would be
She's the
wonderful.
mobile sources section chief that implements the rules.
And we're also joined by Andrea Wright, who's the program manager for the Environmental and Policy Division with Michelle Blumenauer from the Agency of Transportation as the director. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, thank you so much for having us in this morning. Rachel and I will be tag teaming the presentation this morning. And then, as I mentioned, both Andrea, Michelle, and Deirdre online are also available for some of the questions that might come up. We have ample time this morning to go through the presentation we've brought. And so we welcome questions along the way if that is helpful for all of you, not to table them. And please just signal and we're happy to pause and answer any questions that come up. So the Agency of Natural Resources is here today to present an overview of both our LEV and ZEV rules. We're going to provide some background on the history of Vermont's participation in the California Program Action Standards, as well as explain how they signal and work critically to support our climate action work in the state of Vermont. We'll walk through how the rules work, as well as provide an update on progress to date and discuss some of the impacts and benefits around these rules to Vermonters, especially as they're coming into effect in model year 26. So I want to spend a few minutes talking about the history of what has been a really important program in the state of Vermont. Under the Federal Clean Air Act, Vermont has the authority to regulate emissions in line with the federal government or to follow identical to California. And as so long as those regulations are identical to what California puts on the books. Over the past few decades, Vermont has adopted many of California's regulatory programs, and you'll see from the history here, starting back in the 90s. Those programs are both low emission vehicle programs as well as zero emission vehicle programs. The LEV program itself, which was the initial program, focuses on the emissions of criteria air pollutants and greenhouse gases, whereas the ZEV program, the zero emission vehicle program, regulates at the manufacturer level the delivery of electric vehicles to the state of Vermont. Vermont has required automakers to deliver EVs to Vermont for more than 20 years through the Advanced Clean Cars program, which is a sales requirement that was first adopted in 2000 for model year 2024. That doesn't make sense. For sale in 2004, not 2024. We're just finishing 2024. In 2022, Vermont also added to its regulations on the books and adopted advanced clean trucks. This rule will go into effect again in model year 2026, and it's for medium and heavy duty vehicles, and is similar to the way advanced clean cars work in that it requires an increasing number of ZEV, zero emission vehicles, to be delivered to the state of Vermont. And as Rachel will talk through the more specificity of the rules, it doesn't ramp up in the same way that advanced clean cars does, acknowledging that the technology is not there in the same place with medium and heavy duty vehicles as it is with the light duty fleet. And we just want to say that right now, with all the discussion around this, it's been really important for the state of Vermont and the Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources to retain her authority to adopt these kinds of regulations. They're critical for the state of Vermont in meeting our climate goals. In fact, we could not meet our requirements of our Global Warming Solutions Act without regulations such as this.
Can I ask a question? You were saying questions are okay?
Yes, please.
So are all of these from the California standards?
Yes, they're all California goals.
And one of the, just draw your attention to one of the handouts that we provided is a detailed summary of all of the regulations. So you can see we provided more detail about which regulations were adopted at which time on the history.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I want to switch and share with you a map, but you'll note at the bottom of the screen that Vermont's not alone in this. 17 other states, in addition to California, have followed lead with adopting stricter motor vehicle. This map shows those states in green. It shows states that have advanced both ACC2, Advanced Clean Cars 2, and Advanced Clean Trucks. And other states in orange show states that have implemented ACC2 already. And then states in blue have followed with stricter emission standards, may have Advanced Clean Cars on the books, but have not taken the action yet to adopt Advanced Clean Cars 2 or Advanced Clean Trucks, although some have signaled that they might. These ZEV rules are part of a longstanding program that has been really successful. And then specifically California and what are called the Section 177 states. These are the states that follow the Clean Air Act exemption that California has, make up 40.1% of US new light duty vehicle sales, as well as 35.9% of US new LDV sales. So I want to shift for a minute and talk about how these rules fit in specifically to Vermont's climate action goals, and then turning it over to Rachel to dive a bit deeper into the rules themselves. Vermont, as you know, you all as a legislature have taken ambitious action around passing the Global Warming Solutions Act in 2020. Vermont is already feeling the impacts of climate change quite dramatically. with spring arriving 2 weeks earlier, winter starting 1 week later, and precipitation falling in more extreme events, especially in the form of rain, with annual precipitation increasing by more than 7 inches. We also know that these impacts are not felt proportionally across the state, with disadvantaged and low-income communities feeling the burden more impactfully. Of course, climate change is a global issue. And as a participant in the global economy, we need to participate in achieving our share of emission reductions and take climate change seriously in response to these impacts. These rules are part of our strategy to act to mitigate emissions of greenhouse gas emissions, as well as work cooperatively and in coordination with our state and federal partners. These rules play a particular component around the passage of the Global Warming Solutions Act. And I just want to draw that detail a bit more specifically for folks who may not be as familiar with the rulemaking requirement of the Global Warming Solutions Act. The Global Warming Solutions Act was passed in 2020. Many of you probably know, it took goals that had been on the books for more than a decade, almost 2 decades, and made those statutory requirements around emissions reductions. It stood up the Vermont Climate Council, which is an independent body that was charged with drafting a climate action plan to meet those emissions reductions requirements, as well as the broader objectives of the GWSA, which also speak to how we will address climate resilience, adaptation, enhance our natural and working lands to be there to provide the sequestration and storage benefits that they do, as well as buffer our impacts from increasing storms. The first climate action plan was passed and adopted by the Climate Council in December of 2021. And one of the sort of powers of the Global Warming Solutions Act is that rules that are incorporated into the GWS, into the climate action plan, have a date that the Agency of Natural Resources must adopt them by. They're one of the citizen suit provisions within the GWSA forces the hand of ANR to act on those rules within 1 year of adoption of the climate action plan. In the first climate action plan, the rules that were put forward in that plan for ANR to act on were these LEVZEV rules that we're talking about. The agency was very supportive of those rules. As we said, with previous regulation out of our agency, they built upon the success of the clean car rules that we had already had in place. And so we worked very closely with the Climate Council to ensure that they were part of our climate strategy as put forward in the initial climate action. But I do want to suggest that it also required us to adopt those rules by December 1st of 2022, which is what we were able to actually do. And as we get in and talk about the rules, we'll also talk about some of the other requirements of the GWSA around rulemaking and the robust engagement that we had to do around that. Otherwise. And I just want to note that we're currently in a climate action plan update period. The climate action plan was required to be adopted by December 1st for the first plan, but the GWSA changed that date going forward, and plans are now required to be updated and adopted every 4 years from July 1st going forward. So the Climate Council is currently contemplating new rules and regulations, policies, recommendations to continue to advance climate action that advances meeting the now 2030 emissions reductions requirement, which this next slide speaks to understanding that the first requirement of the Global Warming Solutions Act around our emissions reductions has come and passed. It was 26% below 2005 levels by January 1st of this year. That is measured by the legal backstop of the Global Warming Solutions Act, which is our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. While that inventory lags in calendar years, it will not be published, and we won't officially know if we've met that target for 2 more years. We actually will have a very good understanding of whether or not we're on track with the 2 largest sectors in the sector we're here to talk about today, the transportation sector, because over the last several years, the agency has worked really hard to improve upon that inventory to both have more accurate and timely data and also use Vermont-specific data and not modeled data. And for the transportation sector, which is shown in green here, and the orange sector, which is shown in is the residential, commercial, industrial sector. We use real fuel sale data that's provided to us both by the Department of Motor Vehicles and the Joint Fiscal Office for the thermal sector. And those numbers for 2024 will actually be released, but likely by the end of this month, typically. So while we won't officially know if we're on track for the target that just passed, we'll have a very good idea, as agriculture, which is our third largest sector, is pretty much holding flat in the state. And our most of our emissions reductions are really coming from transportation and the thermal sector. Although I will say, and we'll get into a little bit more around the sectors, the Climate Council in the first update and development of the Climate Action Plan was asked to consider proportionality. And so the burden of meeting these emissions reductions should not fall to any one sector. And the Climate Council has said that proportional reductions will occur across all sectors. In the end, the GWSA just looks at our total emissions. So that question of proportionality is really one that looks at the burden and responsibility across all sectors. But I believe if we meet the target, we meet the target. So we'll see. So I know many of you have seen this chart before in your work. This is data produced by our agency through the Greenhouse Gas Inventory and made beautiful by the Energy Action Network through this chart, which shows on the left the real historical emissions as tracked by our greenhouse gas inventory. And then the shaded on the right shows what the GWSA requires of our state. And I imagine many of you are aware around sort of the disagreement, consternation around whether or not we have met the 2025 target. But I would push us to say that we all agree that we are not on track to meet the 2030 emissions reductions requirement. And that shows by that steep line that will require significant policy intervention between now and the next few years if we are to course correct. And that will be challenging, to say the least. So the 2030 emissions reductions is 40% below 1990 levels, or roughly cut in half from when we passed the Global Warming Solutions Act. What you'll notice is that baseline year of what we're measuring against changes from the 2025 target to the 2030 target, making it a much harder emissions reductions to achieve as a state. And again, we'll talk about when we talk about electricity and electric vehicles and charging shortly in the presentation, but through the work of the legislature, through the work of our state, we have a very clean electricity sector, and that doesn't track nationally. Our electricity sector is the blue sector. It's one of our smallest sectors in the inventory, and it provides the ability for us to transform and think about how we heat our homes, drive our vehicles in a way that is low carbon, which is different from some states who still rely on coal or other fossil fuels for generation. Just to drill into the data a little bit more, the transportation sector makes up 40% of our emissions. And much of that comes from the light duty fleet. The small insert on the left shows that 80% of the emissions in our transportation sector comes from light duty vehicles. So the way you and I drive around the state and make use of transportation, that's not out of line with small rural states who don't have the capacity to expand public transit as easily and readily as other states. But it's just a recognition as we dive into these rules, how important it is to think about the incorporation of electric vehicles into our fleet and the equitable access to those vehicles for all of Vermonters. Before I hand it over to Rachel, I do want to dive into one of the handouts we provided yesterday to all of you is the full rulemaking package for these rules. As part of that, we did a detailed analysis of the emissions reductions and that we would expect from the implementation of these rules related to the 2030 emissions reduction requirements of the Global Warming Solutions Act. as I mentioned, the Climate Council took a proportional emissions reductions perspective for the planning and policies they put forward in the initial climate action plan. So forgive me as I read my notes, but the Vermont would need to reduce its transportation greenhouse gas emissions to 2.06 million metric tons by 2030 from 2.93. And so, which is what it was in 2021, the most current emissions reduction, greenhouse gas emissions. So that requires us to cut just shy of 1 million metric tons of carbon emissions from the transportation sector, 0.87 million metric tons by 2030 in order to meet the sector's proportional emissions reductions requirement. Right now, we estimate from this emissions modeling that we did for the rule passage that these rules, we didn't look at them for 2025 because they were not going to come into effect till model year 2026. So they don't have any transformational change on the emissions between now and the target we just passed. But they will be on the books for a number of years before the 2030 emissions reductions target. And they are one of the only 3 policies put forward in the initial climate action plan that get more than 10% of the emissions share for any sector. The other 2 being the clean heat standard and the, I actually don't remember the third one, but there are 3 policies in the initial climate action plan that I can check on what the third one. But most of the policies put forward in the initial climate action plan were small comparatively. And this would get us 0.23 million metric tons towards our 2030. Still, I want to note, with these rules, leaving a gap of 0.64 million metric tons. So even with these rules in place, they do not get us what we need for the transportation sector by 2030. Further intervention policies, augments would need to be made if we were to come to meet those emissions reductions. And just to note, all of the modeling that we've done for this envisions all of those vehicles being delivered to Vermont, being placed in service in Vermont. And so that in and of itself is ambitious. Those vehicles need complementary policies to ensure that they're purchased by Vermonters. They need robust EV incentives still. They need a charging network. We're going to speak to what VTrans has already shared with many of you about that work, but it does put in place a need for other work to be done to ensure these vehicles can be driven and purchased in Vermont. I think that is my last slide. Oh, no, one more for me. I just want to acknowledge that these rules, they're implemented out of the Air Quality and Climate Division in Department of Environmental Conservation. These rules, first and foremost, were contemplated back in the 90s, largely because of the air quality benefits that they have for the states that put them forward. And so these rules go way beyond just thinking about our climate targets, and think about how we remove volatile organic compounds and nitrous oxides from our air, as well as fine particulate matter, which we know causes respiratory and cardiovascular damage. And in particular, these rules, both in Vermont and in other states, have had a particular impact in supporting benefits in disadvantaged communities, understanding that many of those communities live in high concentrations to vehicles and transportation issues. I want to pass it over to Rachel unless there's any questions about the details of the rules. Thank you, Senator.
You said the greenhouse gas inventory, you really won't be able to confirm it for a couple of years. Yeah, we've already had 2 lawsuits, from what I understand, for not meeting our goals. What basis are they using to sue?
Yeah, so
Getting the information from?
Rachel's can clarify if I get anything out of line, but the Global Warming Solutions Act has multiple civil suit provisions. The civil suit provisions speak to the targets themselves and whether or not we hit them. And we have not been sued specifically on that provision. There were other civil suit provisions that spoke to the Secretary's determination whether additional rulemakings were needed to ensure that we would meet the target. And so those are forward looking. And there was a provision as of July 1st, 2024, where the secretary needed to act or in her opinion, not act, whether or not we were on track to meet the 2025 target. And through the modeling work that we did, through other interpretations of the work, the secretary chose not to promulgate new rules. And that is the justification of the lawsuit that we are currently under.
So the legislature imposed these rules.
Mhm.
And the secretary is confirming that we haven't met them, so we can be sued.
Well,
Doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, just to clarify, so the Global Warming Solutions Act sets the emissions target. The legislature, through the Global Warming Solutions Act, directed the Climate Council to create and direct the agency's action via rulemaking in the plan. So the plan sets out, the plan for meeting reduction requirements. These rules, or updates to these rules, which had, as we mentioned, had already been in place, for decades in Vermont, be updated to include additional, more stringent requirements to help meet those reductions. As soon as that was in the plan, it set us on a clock for 1 year to implement those rules. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
The lawsuit, though, right now is not about the target. The lawsuit is about whether or not the secretary used the correct discretion to do more rule. Like the secretary more had the ability to contemplate additional rules or updates to these rules if she felt like we were not on a path to meet the 2025 emissions reductions. I imagine if we do not meet the 2025 emissions reductions, there will be additional action. And that's a different civil suit. That's a different provision within the GWSA.
Okay.
Like to drive.
Sure. Well, you can just
try
look us through. Yeah. So now we're going to turn our attention to the specific rules that were actually adopted in 2022. So this includes, as I mentioned, we have an existing Advanced Clean Cars 2 program that has been in place for decades. And the requirements and the rules that were in the Climate Action Plan were updates to these existing rules. So these were referred to as Advanced Clean Cars 2, Advanced Clean Trucks, the Low NOx Omnibus Rule, and the Phase 2 Greenhouse Gas Rule. As Jane mentioned, we provided information from our rulemaking record. We had an extensive public engagement process that we undertook to adopt those rules in 2022. The agency hosted 6 public meetings in person and around the state, in cities across like all 4 corners of the state. We had information sessions for businesses, dealers. We spoke to manufacturers, engaged with our partners in the region. We also attended the annual Vermont Truck and Bus Association to gather input. In total, we had close to 350 individuals and entities that submitted public comments. One of the documents we provided in the handouts is our response to comments. So there is a requirement in the Administrative Procedure Act in Vermont that we respond in writing to all comments provided in the record. On our website, you can find all the comments if you want to read them. They're summarized in the responsiveness comment. Almost all of the issues that we're going to talk about today or that we've heard lately did come up and we did address through the rulemaking process. I also just want to mention a plug for the agency that at the time, Legislative Counsel for LPAR indicated that our rulemaking package was one of the most robust and comprehensive packages that they've seen from an agency adopting a rule. It's over 500 pages. We provided some of the nuts and bolts for you, but just want to emphasize that we spent a lot of time looking at the data, reviewing the studies, reviewing the reports, and feel like there's a really strong basis for these rules and that we've addressed concerns now and are happy to walk through those for the committee today. So there's kind of 2 primary components of these rules. One is to make vehicles cleaner through what we call the low emission vehicle requirements. These are standards that reduce carbon monoxide, hydrocarbons, nitrogen oxides from vehicles. This just makes regular internal combustion engines or fossil fuel vehicles cleaner today through requirements of engines and things like that, catalytic converters, that kind of thing. It also has an electric vehicle or a plug-in hybrid vehicle sales requirement. So that's a requirement that manufacturers deliver a certain percentage of vehicles to the state at an increasing percentage each year. So it's important to recognize that we kind of have two of those kind of components, what we call the LEV or the low emission requirements, and then the ZEV or the zero emission requirements. It's also important to indicate that there are consumer protections built into the emission standards that we've adopted that are more stringent than the federal standards. There's requirements in our rules that require vehicles to be cleaner, more durable. There's longer warranties for vehicles because we're a California state. So there's a lot of consumer benefits as well that are built into our regulations. It's important to note that this is not a vehicle purchase mandate. There's no requirement on consumers. There's no requirement on dealers or Vermont businesses. This is strictly a requirement on automakers to make vehicles cleaner and to deliver a certain percentage each year. Internal combustion engines will continue to be available for sale in Vermont even after 2035. So just want to make that point. I'll move on to a little more detail here. Oh, sorry, I don't have the slides. I just clicked on. I watched you. Thank you. Great. If only I had the power though. So let's talk specifically about Advanced Clean Cars 2, which is one of the updates that we've adopted. In Advanced Clean Cars 2 is an amendment to our existing program. It covers light duty passenger vehicles of a certain vehicle weight rating. It's a requirement imposed solely on automakers, as I mentioned. And here on the slide, you can see in the purple, we have the existing zero emission vehicle sales. And I just want to, I know there's a lot of acronyms thrown around in the rulemaking packages. A zero emission vehicle includes plug-in hybrids. It's not just a vehicle, an EV, what you might think of as an electric vehicle traditionally. A ZEV also includes a plug-in hybrid. So in the purple line, you can see where our sales are, and I have a little more information about existing sales broken down by quarter on the next slide. In green, you can see the existing Advanced Clean Cars sales requirement. And as Jane indicated, had an EV delivery requirement in Vermont since at least model year 2004. Sorry, I said 2024. And the ACC, here you can see in the blue line, the sales requirement for ACC2, which we've adopted, ramps up to 35% by 2026 and gets to 100% by 2035. As I indicated, the ACC2 rule also includes the requirements for stricter emission standards for internal combustion engine vehicles. These vehicles also undergo more stringent testing and certification through California to ensure that these vehicles meet the standards. There's a lot of benefits through that more rigorous certification process for vehicles in the state. Let's move to the next slide, feel free to ask questions as we go. Yeah.
So the plug-in hybrids do count, but they're not CEVs.
They do count. So when we say
Count, but they're not CEVs.
well, they're considered
Your document.
yeah, there's a lot of acronyms, but they're considered a near zero emission vehicle or like a NEV. But it's grouped in our sales data.
Okay. And they're all the states, so that's the same.
Yes, that's the same. Yeah. And so when we say a ZEV, we're referring to, I know there's a lot of acronyms in here, but we're referring to both an electric vehicle and a plug-in hybrid. That's consistent for the sales data as well.
Any vehicle with a plug
Yes.
or a hydrogen.
Yeah. Yes, the hydrogen fuel cells also count as a zero emission vehicle.
I thought that California backed away from that 30-35 mandate. No?
That is still in place in California. California is currently considering amendments to the Advanced Clean Trucks regulation. Well, just to be clear, this is only for this 100% by 2035 is only for passenger vehicles and light duty vehicles. We know that market is much further along than the medium and heavy duty market for trucks. And so I'll show that trajectory in a few slides. So that never gets to 100%. I think it maxes out around 55 to 75%, depending on the weight class of the truck. Yeah.
Well, you have this graph up in the document explaining the rule. It talked about 2022 that the requirement aligns where the market was expected to be in 2026, but I don't know if we still think the market's going to be where we thought in 22.
Yeah.
Say where we think it's going to be in 2026.
So one important thing to recognize about this graph and the sales requirement is it's not just met through strict vehicle delivery in the state. The Advanced Clean Cars 2 and Advanced Clean Trucks are based on a credit, compliance is determined on a credit deficit banking system where manufacturers earn credits by delivering a vehicle that meets the definition of zero emission vehicle, so a plug-in or an EV, and then they earn a quote deficit by delivering an internal combustion engine vehicle. So there's lots of ways that manufacturers can earn and bank credits and even trade credits. So when we're looking at the percentage, we're not looking at, how many did they deliver in Vermont specifically. We're looking at actually how many credits do they have across the market. So we do look nationally at the market and regionally. I guess I'm getting ahead to maybe jump 2 slides. So this is what, as I mentioned, the compliance flexibilities, that's what we refer to that as. So there's like early compliance credits, so they can earn credits even before the model year has taken place. So they're earning credits right now. There's also credits from Advanced Clean Cars 1 that we have made transferable. So they have banks of credits that they can use for compliance for 2026. There's also ways that they can earn extra credit by delivering vehicles at a discount for what we call our environmental justice vehicle value. So we give, I don't remember if it's 1.5 or 1.25 credits for a sale to a clean mobility program in Vermont. And we actually have a manufacturer who's already starting to do this, and which is exciting. So they earn kind of extra credits for that. So when you look at the sales trajectory, my point is that you're actually looking at how many credits do you have for that compliance year? And I just want to point out that if a manufacturer were to use all the compliance flexibilities in the existing rule, it actually reduces your delivered in Vermont requirement by 70%, like in terms of how many you would actually need to deliver to the state. So I think that's just an important point to make.
Do we have a graph of credits? Because we always see that graph of percentages.
Yep. So this is what's been delivered for sale. So this is the actual sales market. The way that reporting works, we get usually, it takes about 12 to 18 months to get the credit reports delivered from manufacturers. So we don't have the specific early credit report for the 2026, or for the early compliance credit started to be generated in 2024. So we don't yet have the early credit data for specific manufacturers, but we are starting to get that this year. I think we've gotten reports for maybe 2 manufacturers, so we know just a few, but so I don't have that on the slide.
Excuse me, Rachel.
Oh, thank you, Deirdre. Sorry, this is Deirdre, our mobile sources manager, who actually probably knows the answer to this question. Deirdre?
My name is Deirdre Ritzer. I work for the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. And I did want to say that we do have publicly available on our website the current credit banks for the vehicle manufacturers participating in Advanced Clean Cars 1, because Advanced Clean Cars 2 hasn't really started yet. With model year 2026, we don't have credits up for that at this point because we still need them to report at the end of model year 2026, which hasn't happened yet. But we do have the current credit banks up on our website. And I believe we have model year 2022 credits up on our website. And we're in the process of updating those to include model year 2023. We just haven't had our website updated yet. But I can perhaps drop a link to that page in the chat if that's helpful.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you, Deirdre. Okay, great.
That would be helpful to see what the gap is there, and not just percentage of sales, which is what we always see, since it's not percentage of sales, it's credits, and seeing what the gap is there that's different than that. And do we think the credit is in 2026?
Sorry to interrupt, Senator. What I was just going to show is one of the nice things that Deirdre and Rachel put on the slide is you can see at least that they've been over delivering for the last 3 years. So you can, what the requirement was 7%, 8%, and they've been increasing to almost 13%. So those are, you can anticipate that those would show up in the credits.
Right, but it's just such a big gap. And do we think that, and we thought when we said it that, we'll be at 35%. I just haven't seen any evidence.
Yeah, so we do think that based on there's a really bad graphic we didn't include here that shows this sales requirement with each of the credits showing a different line getting lower, like if you were to use each of the compliance flexibilities. So I think that's an important point. But as Deirdre mentioned, we don't yet, because this starts in model year 2026, we don't yet know what the credit will look like. But it sounds like Deirdre's provided the 2022 credit information, which is what we have.
It'd be good to know how much they have to carry forward.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I can ask another question on compliance, I thought in Clean Car 1 that there was like a national compliance basically, and that you could get credit from one state carried forward to another. And I guess maybe it doesn't matter if that's true because one is one and we're in two. But is there a way to earn credit? If a manufacturer, it was obviously a national manufacturer, earn credits from one state. It's like one state, they're way over. Can they use those credits
Yes.
in another state?
Yes, they can. And we refer to that as pooling. So that's allowed.
Okay, so they can do that.
Yes. Deirdre can. Okay, so Advanced Clean Trucks, as I indicated, has, well, the purpose here is similar. It's to promote the widespread adoption of zero emission vehicles. Because of where the market is, I like the committees to think about where we were at the beginning of advanced clean cars. So when we look at the trajectory of electric vehicles, those deliveries have increased, and that market share has increased over time because of this technology forcing regulation. Advanced Clean Trucks is the beginning of that kind of regulation in the medium and heavy duty space. So it's natural that there's not going to be as many medium and heavy duty vehicles available in the market. The one thing I want to point out is that this market is actually accelerating faster than light duty did at the time. So Advanced Clean Trucks in general works similar to Advanced Clean Cars 2 with the credit deficit system with different sales targets. And as I mentioned, similar for Advanced Clean Cars 2, there's also requirements that make these vehicles cleaner, even internal combustion engines cleaner, have longer warranties. Off-road vehicles and equipment and passenger vehicles are not subject to Advanced Clean Cars 2 or Advanced Clean Trucks. And Vermont is joined by 10 other states that have adopted the Advanced Clean Trucks rule at this time. Similar to the other program, there's, as I mentioned, a credit deficit system. This includes extensive flexibilities for manufacturers. And California is actually in the process of negotiated in 2023, California that sets these standards, negotiated what's called a clean truck partnership with the national trade associations and the manufacturers. And they asked for additional compliance flexibilities, keeping the regulation with the same emissions benefits, but there's some flexibilities that California is considering proposing now. They haven't been formally proposed yet, but when those take effect, that should even help this market even more. We can move to the next slide. As I indicated, the mass market for medium and heavy duty EVs wasn't widely available before 2022, but it's developing rapidly, much more quickly than the light duty market did nationally and in Vermont. This is in part a result of an MOU from 2013, a memorandum of understanding between multi-states to adopt these regulations. And in that case, it took 7 years to reach 5% market share for light duty, and for medium heavy duty, it's already at around 5% in less than 3 years. So just to show the significant market increase in this space. There's obviously a need for growth and diversity among the different weight classes. And one other thing I wanted to mention, there are some additional flexibilities in the Advanced Clean Trucks rule that allows manufacturers some flexibility between different weight classes. So certain credits can be earned for certain weight classes that can be used for compliance. They're interchangeable across weight class. There's weight class modifiers that exist as well. So I don't know if there's any questions about this one. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just wondering if you could go into a little more detail about the weight class modifiers.
Yeah.
Because one of the concerns I think we've heard is, especially we heard from a lobbyist who represent the Auto Trucks Association, that essentially the axles, that they would weigh too much to even be able to comply with this. So I'm wondering if that's the answer.
Yeah, so it is true that electric vehicles are way more than, I'm just pulling up my notes here, that way more than internal combustion engines. But I think there's a federal weight limit that's being expanded to include electric vehicles. I think it's adding about 2,000 pounds. So it is being considered. Let me find my notes. Yeah, I don't know, Deirdre, if you want to jump in on the weight class issue.
We can also, I'm happy to get that answered another time.
Yeah, why don't we do that? And I'll circle back, we did actually just host a detailed information session on this topic for dealers, and this was a topic that came up. So I did want to make sure I had my notes from that available, but we can circle back.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So as we mentioned, these rules also require fossil fuel vehicles to be cleaner and more durable. There's longer warranties. That's something that we benefit from Vermont by being a California state. These cars are more durable. This is important to ensure that electric vehicles are more reliable and have a longer useful life. That's one of the benefits for a vehicle being California certified. Oh, Deirdre said she can unmute to address the weight class question.
Yes, sorry, thank you. I had too many windows open and I could not find this one. Rachel was referring to the federal maximum gross vehicle weight limit, which is 80,000 pounds. However, natural gas vehicles and EVs may exceed the federal maximum gross vehicle weight limit for comparable conventional fuel vehicles by up to 2,000 pounds. It has been reported that at least 20 states have adopted the additional 2,000 pound allowance to EVs. At this time, Vermont has not. Another thing to consider is key findings from the North American Council on Freight Efficiency, or NACFE, another acronym. They provide that for class 3 to 6 vehicles, the heavier weight of electric trucks is not a significant issue because most applications cube out. That means parcels fill up cargo areas before reaching the maximum weight capacity. For those applications that are more densely packed loads that operate near weight limits, such as beverage delivery, fleets may opt for a vehicle with a higher gross vehicle weight rating or designs that focus more on light weighting. And then for class 7 and 8 vehicles, weight is not an issue for many, but not all applications. Over 70% of freight trucks operate at levels below 80,000 pounds. Also, the weight differential between diesel and electric trucks should take into account the diesel powertrain components and fluids that are not needed in electric trucks. NACFE found that diesel-related hardware and fluids add up to over 7,800 pounds on some Class 8 highway tractors. In terms of the weight issues, the biggest challenge will be more for long-haul trucks that operate at weight capacity. And I think the more exact the understanding of freight weights, the better the electricity needs for battery electric vehicles can be estimated. And this can help fleets better match battery electric vehicles to duty cycles. In the meantime, we think manufacturers really need to continue to refine batteries with rate reduction as a key goal. Hope that's helpful.
That was extremely helpful. Thank you.
That's why we have your.
I think we heard a little bit of anxiety from some of the truck association folks around this question. It sounds like it's not necessarily as large of an issue as they purported, but maybe more information is needed.
Yeah, and I would definitely share that there are like legitimate concerns about this market just because it is at the beginning of its transition. And that's why we're monitoring really closely with other states. In California, we regularly meet with our kind of sister states. We call ourselves the 177 states, which refers to that provision of the Clean Air Act that allows us to adopt these rules. We meet regularly with manufacturers and engage with our sister states in California to make sure that we're being reflective of where the market is and considering where we need to adjust or make changes.
So transitioning back to understanding what Vermonters have asked about these rules and regulations, where their questions and concerns are. Rachel alluded to the fact that we just held a hearing last week on advanced clean trucks. We focused that hearing specifically on outreach to dealers who are feeling the pinch from manufacturers right now. And we want to be respectful and understand what their questions and concerns are, be able to provide answers where possible, and then their questions and concerns as we continue to monitor implementation of the rules and meet with other states. But as Rachel also alluded to, as we went through the rulemaking package and developed these rules in 2022, we did extensive engagement around these rules. Another interesting component of the Global Warming Solutions Act is that there's no public, I like to joke, there's actually no public engagement required in the GWSA around the climate action plan, although we do it and take it very seriously. But there's a very robust section in the Global Warming Solutions Act around public engagement, around rules that are contemplated in the climate action plan and then put forward and advanced. So the Climate Office, working very closely with the Air Division that Deirdre is part of, and we have the benefit of having Rachel be General Counsel for both the Climate Office and the Air Quality Division, which is wonderful coordination. Worked really closely to implement the 6 public hearings that we did around the state, as well as the 2 online meetings that were intended to be specifically focused around low-income disadvantaged communities to hear from them about their concerns, in addition to the meetings and engagement that the Air Quality Division did specific to the people being regulated around these rules to hear concerns and questions. We heard from more than 340 people and entities, and as Rachel alluded to, provided really robust responses to those comments, which you have in the handouts we provided you yesterday. I'm just going to walk you through, and we have the benefit of having VTrans with us as well today, some of the legitimate concerns and questions that the state is working cooperatively with the Transportation Agency and others to implement and address. Understanding what EVs look like, the fact that they're being delivered to the state, there has been legitimate concerns as the transition occurs and until we hit that critical market share, as well as have the benefit of having more and more EVs in the market to provide used vehicles to Vermonters. The majority of Vermonters buy used vehicles. I've never owned a new vehicle in my life. I think many people and many Vermonters relate to that. And that's one of the benefits of these rules, is that by providing an increased share of electric vehicles, we hope to also provide increased used vehicles over time by doing that. But understanding that we need to support Vermonters in purchasing these vehicles to make them part of the market share. We worked very closely with all of you in the state legislature as well to continue to provide robust state incentives. And obviously through the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act several years ago now, the federal government made permanent, as permanent as one can hope in the current climate, a $7,500 federal incentive. The state of Vermont obviously also provides up to $10,000, and that's because some of these can be paired together. So there's new partial electric vehicles incentives, 5,000, replace your ride for 5,000, Mileage Smart, and then a newer program around up to $800 for electric bikes, which provide alternative modes of transportation for people who can access and use electric bikes beyond vehicles. Please.
Where does that money come from?
I'm happy to turn it over to VTrans if you'd like to speak to that.
Hi, I'm Andrea Wright, the environmental.
The incentive program is been sitting on $27 million. It's 2020.
So tax dollars?
And ultimately, how much is that saving Vermonters?
I'm not sure I can specifically answer that. I mean, we know that getting into an electric vehicle overall, the light vehicle, does save a lot of money. All of our programs are income based, so greater amounts going to lower incomes. So really focusing on folks that need it the most to make that transition.
Thank you. Also wanted to just, I just wanted to indicate that we have in the rulemaking package, we have an economic analysis where we actually, part of the requirement to adopt a rule is that we look at costs to Vermonters and impacts to Vermonters and kind of do a cost benefit analysis. We did do that in the rulemaking package. Other benefits beyond just the money in pockets for people that want to buy electric vehicles. There's two models that we used in the package that look at savings, economic benefits from reduced air pollution in the state, related to, avoiding hospital visits, that kind of thing. So there's more information in the technical support document on other savings overall to the state of Vermont.
Yeah, and the other component of that economic analysis looks at the benefit of the social cost of carbon to the state of Vermont as well.
Yeah, I don't know who it is.
Go ahead, you're fine.
She sees me on the, okay. But just to be clear, all of our incentives have been fully utilized at this point, and we haven't seen a proposal from AOT to include new incentives in this year's budget. Is that accurate?
There's some that still have funding. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have our new PEV mileage smart and rider are all exhausted of funds. The only ones that have remaining are the electric fire fleet. We have about 3,000 left in that. And then we have our e-bikes, about 20,000 left in that.
Oh, there's still money for the e-bikes. Oh, I thought they had.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention that the Agency of Natural Resources also has incentives for specifically for medium and heavy duty vehicles and trucks. I think we put on the last slide, but we have funds through our diesel emission reduction assistance, Act grant. You had it on.
Oh, I did. I
Business
got you.
slide, yeah. This one here. So we call it our DERA grant program. So we have direct funding that we can provide for off-road vehicles and on-road. I think there's about 300,000 in that one. Then we also still have funding from a settlement agreement that the state reached with Volkswagen. I think there's about $3 to $5 million remaining, and we use that for trucks for medium and heavy duty. So like truck hauler, trash haulers, and some other, I think we had school buses, electric buses. So the state has existing incentives for that still in our budget.
But you can't buy an electric vehicle for a propane truck or a fuel carrying truck in the state. So it's not really fair for them. And also you don't allow for regular hybrid vehicles. It has to be a plug-in.
So just to be clear, there's no, that's just a requirement to encourage manufacturers and to require them to deliver those vehicles to the state. It doesn't require a fleet to purchase a vehicle if it doesn't make sense. So there's no requirement that a business would buy any electric vehicles if it didn't make sense. And certainly if there's not a vehicle or an engine type that exists for a type of vehicle, the manufacturer doesn't have to produce that and a fleet doesn't have to buy that. So that's part of why the credits can be interchangeable for certain weight classes in the Advanced Clean Trucks regulation, because that market is still evolving and growing.
Again, recognizing that the upfront cost of EV is higher, the current realities of vehicle ownership mean that the overall cost of EV ownership is actually still lower than fossil fuel vehicles significantly. It's due to several factors, including the less expensive fuel. Fueling with electricity is the equivalent of roughly $1.50 a gallon of gas. There's less maintenance on your vehicle due to fewer moving parts. Automakers are also required to provide, as Rachel mentioned earlier, warranty periods and produce cars that have a longer useful life, increasing the longevity of vehicles and its components. The agency provided the detailed economic analysis that Rachel referred to. It looks at both the light duty class, as well as an economic analysis around the ownership of the medium and heavy duty vehicles, which do have a significant increase in up costs.
Is that savings on that last slide based on a certain amount of miles per year?
Yeah, I would imagine it is, and I'm sure that's in the economic analysis, but I
Yeah.
don't know the mileage
I
per
can,
year.
I can check on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I haven't had to pay for an oil change in a long time.
Yeah. We will address on a slide coming up the overall life cycle emissions of an electric vehicle, which is often, and I can explain what that means in a minute as well, also raised by the public. Like, is an electric vehicle really cleaner? We look at the mining and the building of the vehicle address. So in addition, a key difference between electric vehicles and gas cars is that the future looks like fueling your car at home. The vast majority of EV fueling will take place at home, which maximizes both savings and convenience. Plus, with the vehicle to grid technology, which allows use of your vehicle's battery as a power source, in an increasing volatile climate, you'll be able to use your EV to power your home during excess power outages. At-home charging should be available to everyone, even if you don't own a home. And so Vermont has really put a significant effort into grant programs to install charging stations at apartment buildings and other locations to serve rental housing. In addition, the Vermont Agency of Transportation, we were able to provide you the reports that VTrans has developed around EV charging. And we have also been working really closely, and some of the next few slides will show where we've been able to advance public charging in the state of Vermont, as well as the distinction between fast charging and level 2 charging. So public charging is now available in more locations than you might think. Vermont continues to invest in public charging in strategic locations, which has been a really thoughtful component of Vermont's work, such as at workplaces, along highway corridors, in downtowns, to get people to park downtown and visit and recreate in towns, and at other popular destinations. And as I mentioned, VTrans provided that report to you all, which you should have that details where this work is really taking advantage of. So actually, speaking back to the handout that Senator White just referenced that many of you saw, we wanted to speak a little bit about charging in the state of Vermont because some of the graphs on that handout were inaccurate. There's really no perfect ratio for charging, especially of level 2 or DCFC chargers per vehicle. And several community specific factors need to be considered, including the type of housing stock, reliance on residential charging, public charging, et cetera. And based on the NREL recommended ratio, Vermont charging deployment is keeping up with and actually outpacing EV adoption. Vermont will continue its efforts to build a robust public charging network to allow electric travel across the state. But what you can see on this chart is that the NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, recommends a ratio of roughly 40 level 2 plugs per 1,000 EVs, and Vermont is at 56.3.
That includes the residential?
Yes.
I actually think Vermont it's either maybe Andrea knows. I think
per
it's,
capita.
yeah, we're either the number 1 in the country, highest per capita, or 2 after California. Or we're the highest. Yeah, so Vermont's the
Per
highest
capita.
per capita.
Yeah, I think per capita is a tricky one. Yeah.
I love per capita.
We love per capita.
Do we have any data, like, it would be good to see not only just this raw number, but as a percentage of the vehicles, because that's the key thing, is how much charging versus the number of cars we're going to see
over time.
Yeah, well, if we're going to be hitting this, 25% or 35%, do we have 35% availability of chargers kind of thing? That seems to be where might not be matched up.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in, the report that Jane referenced that we provided to transportation committees for EV charging, and provided last night to you all as well. Does speak to not the 35 target here with these rules, but we're asked through legislation to estimate how we are doing on supporting charging for the land modeling that was done, so 126,000 vehicles by 2030. And so that and shows that we are currently shy of that, even with some of the current solicitations that we have out. But it does give an estimate of how much money would be needed to reach that goal and how many more reports be needed. So that information is in there. It's less than I would have thought.
One other just point, just because this came up at our Advanced Clean Trucks information session. There was a question about public charging at that session. And for fleets or businesses that operate heavier duty equipment, the intent is that most of that charging is actually depot charging because you're coming back to your main base. So, as we mentioned, most people charge at home and in business settings for fleets and larger vehicles, depot charging is the primary source of charging. So public charging is obviously important and we continue to invest in that. But just wanted to emphasize that especially for heavier duty vehicles, depot charging is really the intent when we adopted this regulation.
Yes, please, thank you. So does this include Teslas in the public and private level 2 station? Because some are public and some are not, or they're public to a certain.
Yeah, the data that was shown on that slide with the over 400 chargers and that is just public.
Okay, so it would not include the Tesla chargers.
That's
Okay,
There, and
thank you.
one kind of tiny detail of the California regulations is a requirement that starting when the takes effect for model year 26, that there be converters available for charging. So that will take effect. I'm not quite sure how that's going to roll out on the Tesla side, but the intent there is that the requirement is that manufacturers provide a converter so that you could use a Tesla charger with any other vehicle.
Just follow up question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe there's also a requirement to have an account. And so that's where Tesla gets to choose to some extent whether it really is public. Even if you have the connection, you need the account.
There's no way to pay.
Yeah, I don't have
Unless they let you have an account.
I mean, these requirements would also apply to Tesla if they're selling vehicles that are registered in Vermont. So I'm not sure how that would, I haven't actually looked into that specifically, but if that's of interest, we could take a look at that.
Yeah, actually, well, can I follow up? Just if the public can actually use the Tesla chargers that are already really strategically placed, and there are a good amount of them, it would be helpful to the state to not have to duplicate that system.
Yeah, and I have to say that the current landscape is due to look very different in the next couple of years should our federal funding continue. We funded solicitations, like I mentioned, we already went out for our first round of solicitations to build out what we would call compliant with our national electric vehicle construction plan, 15 locations in the state. So we are under contract with some entities to start rolling those out. And so that is in an effort to meet the requirements for the NEVI formula funds that we have. That is a fast charging station on the highway corridor system within every 50 miles. The state has set goals that we have it every 25 miles. And so we're going out. We have plans to go out with a solicitation in the very near future to meet that state goal that we have. So the landscape is going to look very different in the next months of years. So,
And what you've done so
certainly
far is great.
ahead.
Yeah. Thank you.
One more. Thank you for the presentation. You guys did a really nice job explaining it. But I don't know if there's any way, I went to buy a new car and I was going to buy an X car. And then I got there, they said, we got part of the deal is you get a tier 2 home charger included from Y Power Company. So I went there to pick it up. The next day I got there and they said, oh, by the way, Y Power Company just backed down and the incentives are no longer available. Is there any way that could be stabilized by the state?
Yeah,
You know what I did? I went next door and bought a Honda.
Well, there are new, so I don't have the details in front of me, but we could definitely follow up because I think the starting in model year 2026, that's when our like next generation of requirements take effect. There were additional requirements related to making plugs available and convertible. So I'm not sure how that would relate to your situation, but it could be that that will start for model year 2026, which I think are just hitting the dealers this.
But for the utilities, that I think that would be a question for the Public Service Department. And I do, the utility incentives and credits vary dramatically by which utility you live within and whether or not you qualify. So that's something that's just interesting and different and not, would be, I'm sure Public Service Department would be welcome to speak about that
I
too.
think eventually we're gonna get through the pitfalls of the program. But in the meantime, it becomes an affordability issue.
Yeah.
For the people in my district.
Yeah, of course.
I gotta get to work. I can't afford a new electric vehicle. I don't have the entrance in my house so I can put in a tier 2 charger.
Yeah.
And eventually that'll all be taken care of, but not in the next 10 years. So.
Right. And as Jane mentioned, one of the benefits, because many people, including myself, would not and could not afford a new vehicle. But one of the benefits of this requirement is to make the used vehicle market also more robust, so that those vehicles, because they have a longer useful life, when somebody is ready to sell their new vehicle, and that vehicle is in the used marketplace, it still has, it's still reliable and durable and it exists. So yeah, we recognize that, it's a privilege to be able to purchase and afford a new vehicle. And this is certainly not an intent that people would, have to buy new vehicles or buy these vehicles, but basically to push the market in that direction, which will have all of these kind of fringe benefits as well.
Okay.
Okay. So, you got the left. Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate Senator Williams, your point. I'm surprised, you must be Green Mountain Power. And I believe, if you're in Rutland, and I believe that they still continue their level 2 payment program. So it hasn't ended. So anyone who's watching, you should have been able to get a free charge.
So.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe that's surprising to me. So I don't know why they would discriminate specifically against you, but the program is.
Maybe my reputation.
We don't want any. Okay.
This is something we can follow up on.
Yeah.
Outside of this concept.
I think it's an important note just to also to understand the costs, the wraparound costs, and how to communicate that to Vermonters. That it's actually been a challenge. We are Green Mountain Power customers, and our house is 1820's house. The electricity, like the cost, the wraparound cost of owning an EV, you might be able to overcome it, but understanding how you can charge and effectively at home, others adds extra costs, and being able to communicate that and support that is important.
Another question here.
So with charging, I think is I would say the number one problem we have right now to meet the goals or the requirements, we should call them. And it seems like there's no incentive, there's no credits if the manufacturers invest in charging networks, right? They don't get any credit for it. And we're not allowed to change the regulations at all, right? So we have to adopt exactly what California. So if we said, oh, we want to give credit for charging, we couldn't do that. If we said we want to not start in 2026, but start in 2027, we couldn't do that. We'd have to get rid of the whole thing or go with what we have now.
And what would happen if we didn't stay the course with the Advanced Clean Cars 2 is we would revert next year to federal standards. You can't keep with Advanced Clean Cars. You revert to federal standards if you don't adopt the new regulation.
But we could keep the emissions. Like I understand what Maine did. They kept the emissions, but they decided not to go with the clean car rule.
Well, Advanced Clean Cars is still on the books in Maine for one more year, and then we'll.
Right.
Yes,
They didn't do clean car 2. Right. Okay.
Yeah, one of the things that we didn't mention today, but is relevant to kind of that timeline that we showed at the beginning. One of the reasons why we adopted the rule, in addition to the climate action plan in 2022, is the requirement that we provide sufficient model year lead time for manufacturers to produce what they need to for the state. So obviously, automotive, manufacturing, they make those compliance plans well in advance in terms of designing those vehicles. And so our rules were, manufacturers have had sufficient time and lots of time to make sure that they can comply, figure out what they need to do either to produce those vehicles, find the credits that they need. So from our perspective, the rules are still achievable with the sales targets that are in place.
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
Just that it's our view that the sales requirements with all the compliance flexibilities that are built on into the rule are achievable. And there are manufacturers that are getting there. And so a lot of the, manufacturers that are having concerns are, some of this is like business planning and business decisions that we, can't make. It's a technology forcing regulation to signal, what they need to do, but how they get there in terms of if they're buying credits from other manufacturers or they're trading them across other states or markets, that's up to them in their business planning. So thank you.
Do we have visibility into, or will we, when it goes into effect, on each state? I assume we would. So we'd be able to see kind of what the total market or of the RECs, let's say, if there are going to be credits going to be trading.
Yes, we
would
do.
know.
Yes, so we, Deirdre might be able to speak to this more, but yeah, we're closely involved with all our sister states and Section 177 states in monitoring that. We work closely with NESCOM, which is the
Northeast States Coordinated Air Units.
Area management.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to monitor that information. So, and that's another thing, like if there are, we closely monitor manufacturer feedback and how they're doing with their market trends and compliance. So that's something that that we kind of track at a regional level as well. So I think we already discussed what was on this slide in terms of support for business. These are the additional grants that we have at ANR beyond Agency of Transportation.
Yeah, and the only thing we might not have spoken to yet was the workforce transitions, and through Drive Electric and other programs, we provide training specifically for things like mechanics and others to get up to speed on working on electric vehicles. So this is a slide that we put together in leading up for the rulemaking to explain the concern and question around where Vermont purchases our electricity from, how clean is it from a carbon perspective, as well as the mining implications and other concerns that Vermonters have about the ethics around life cycle, around electric vehicles. So to be clear, Vermont's greenhouse gas inventory is what's called an in-state or in-bounds inventory. So we account for emissions that are generated in the state of Vermont, except for electricity, which is actually in our greenhouse gas inventory is done on a consumption-based inventory. So the electricity that we consume in Vermont is actually much of it is purchased out of state. We look at consumption of our electricity in our inventory, and it's the only sector that is not done strictly by inbounds. However, things like Hydro-Quebec, that is all deemed carbon neutral, does not have emissions in our inventory. So do just want to note that. The life cycle greenhouse gas emissions, when you look at an electric vehicle compared to a gasoline vehicle. So when you look at all what's called the upstream out-of-state emissions in producing that vehicle, whether it's the extraction of the fossil fuel or the extraction around the minerals that go into the batteries, what this is able to demonstrate is that the overall emissions of a EV is significantly lower still than a fossil fuel vehicle. Question?
Yes, go ahead. Thank you. So this is helpful about the emissions. There are other negative impacts that are alleged. Do you have an analysis of those?
Yeah, we have this, we addressed this topic. This came up a few times in our public hearing So in our response to comments document, we talk a little bit about that. A lot of that relates to the manufacturing of the batteries,
Yeah.
for electric vehicles, the minerals that are required for that.
One of the strengths and powers of the Inflation Reduction Act, obviously, which has concerns going forward, its viability, but it deals with the extraction and mining of minerals, and has an increasing percentage around vehicles that qualify for the tax credits in the federal, that those mines, that the extraction of those minerals come from in the United States.
The last thing on this point is that the California standards have specific requirements that encourage batteries to be able to be recycled, and for manufacturers to consider that in the manufacturing of the model year 2026 vehicles. So there are kind of recycling kind of requirements and considerations built into the California standards for batteries to try to help minimize this this impact.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question on battery life cycle. I think one of the points that gets raised frequently is concern around the extraction of those minerals. And what has always surprised me is I feel like whether it's our phones or other technology, those minerals are being used in my iPad that I'm using right now. And I'm wondering if you could speak to what is the strictness of standards we have for the use of these minerals in any other product and the strictness that we have for these vehicles now? Because there seems to be more standards on electric vehicles than those other products. And I don't know if that's accurate.
I mean, I do not know how we regulate or met with iPads and batteries of mine minerals, but I will say that obviously the federal administration over the last 4 years and even before that was very concerned about minerals. And that comes into effect through both the infrastructure bill, the IRA around Buy America provisions, around the components of extraction and mining, new mines being opened up in states like North Carolina and elsewhere where these minerals exist. And so I understand, like, not to put our impacts on other states or other countries in particular. And so I'm not sure if electric vehicles just get an unfair shake around the application of the minerals, but we'd be happy to look into that. Sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure specifically, but we did, because this came up several times in the session, we've got some, or during the public meetings, we have a pretty detailed kind of summary of some of the like how we address that or how the rules relate to that in our rulemaking summary.
Oh, thank you.
When were these public meetings, and where were they held? Because I don't remember any of them being in my district.
We had one, they were in 2022. They were 6 statewide that occurred. Rachel can help me remember all the locations if I don't remember, but we definitely held one in southwestern Vermont.
Yeah,
I
think we did. I think it was actually
sure if
in
it was in
Rutland. Let me check.
So those meetings would be on record somewhere on the.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, we have them. The meetings were all recorded. We didn't post, we have some of the videos posted on our website. And let me pull the
The in-person
location.
meetings were not recorded.
Right.
Online meetings.
Right,
were
our
recorded.
hybrid. Yep, you're right. Hang on, I've got our list here. We held one in Newport, one in Burlington, New North End. We had one at the Park House, Manchester Center, Vermont, Gateway Center, Newport, Old North End, and then Bellows Falls.
And Barry. We had one.
And one in Barry and Montpelier.
Chair Watson was there with baby.
Yes.
Yeah, do recall.
It's going to be a case check.
These were in September of 2022.
So one of the other consistent criticisms we hear about is whether or not Vermont can meet the increased electricity demand that will be required from this transition. Analysis show that the demand for electricity will significantly increase, doubling by 2050 for the transition from our home heating sector as well as our electric vehicle demand. And integrated resource planning from utilities and grid resiliency efforts show that we can meet this demand. And so this is the projection taken from our modeled electricity demand through the analysis that we've done for the climate action plan and understanding where that electricity will come from, with the blue indicating the increase for transportation in particular over the next 25 years or so. And that work has been underway for the last number of years with the Public Service Department and others to anticipate and plan for that, as well as think about off-peak charging, when charging will occur, as well as battery storage, et cetera. So just finally, thinking about benefits for all Vermonters, making transportation electrification equitable is top of mind for the Agency of Natural Resources, as well as our partnership and work with the Transportation Agency, Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and others. These rules really do push greater EV availability over time, as we've talked about with making increased used vehicles available in the coming years. We've done our best in Vermont to provide purchase incentives, especially targeted and focused at low-income Vermonters, as well as providing a diversity of options with not only purchasing EVs, but replacing rides with more efficient vehicles. Rachel talked about extensively the greater durability of electric vehicles and the protections that these rules afford with longer warranties for Vermonters. And we really have been able to think about how we partner with automakers to really understand the investments in cleaner mobility long-term. And these are commitments that auto manufacturers have spoken to and have stepped up to the challenge with or without federal government partnership. And understand that really over time, have vehicles have lower fuel costs and upkeep costs for Vermonters, making them really hopefully the vehicle of the future that we have been able to instate through the transformation these rules provide. So that's what we have for today. Happy to answer any other questions that have come up. Deirdre's online, and obviously V-Trans is here for clarifying questions. Senator Perchlik.
Did Connecticut change? Did they adopt the rule and
No.
then back out? Because I've seen.
They are still
Show them.
advanced clean cars, and they have not been able to successfully advance advanced clean cars too. They have
Kind of like Maine,
a
did
different
they,
car. Their rule has to be approved by the whole legislature, and that has failed.
so similar, that wasn't like in Maine where they started the process, but then didn't. follow.
Weren't able to.
Some people had them on a map because they assumed it was passing, I guess. And
Yes, exactly. Both Maine and Connecticut have not been able to pass these rules.
Thank you so much. I guess I just want to say thank you for your really robust work around this, and really appreciate you're doing on this.
Thank you. Thank you.
And feel free, we've kept our email address that we put in the slides is the one that we used during the public comment process. We actually continue to get public feedback. We provided that contact information for dealers and fleet owners that had questions and concerns, and we're still receiving comments and providing direct responses and support where we can. So appreciate if there's any additional comments, feel free to reach out.
There's one thing that just to follow up, I would love to get I know this is in your economic analysis, but I would love to just get that number about, how much are how much are Vermonters saving as a result of EV uptake? And there's likely to be continued savings over the life of the vehicle. For the programs that have started, those vehicles are still likely in their, useful lifetime. So those benefits are going to continue. I'll just say that's a number that I'm very interested in.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. We'll follow up.
Yeah. Because I do think that speaks to affordability. So thank you.
We're gonna move on to Johanna, who
Yeah. I'm done.
Yeah, do you want to go?
Welcome, Johanna, if you could,
Thank you.
you're, I'm steering you with the climate council and
But it's
we're
gonna
the
be
next stage in our understanding this.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you this morning. Johanna Miller, I'm the Energy and Climate Program Director at the Vermont Natural Resources Council. I am also the House appointed member to represent statewide environmental organization and have been on the Climate Council since it was established and since it was established, helped to lead the transportation work of the Climate Council as the Transportation Task Group co-chair.
Should be.
Be able to share. Okay, great. Thank you for bearing with me. Share. Sorry, I have a brand new computer. Isn't it pretty? But it won't let me share.
It's black.
Yeah.
Black. I know.
You're cool.
Mm.
I feel like new computers are always,
Black.
well, there's always a learning curve. Like,
Yeah,
this is not
it's
quite
never as
set up
easy.
the way that you want it to be. Yeah.
Must be. Oh, I do love my new iPad.
Do you? Oh, it's
My, can't even see what you're doing on your laptop. You got the screen.
You got the screens in there.
Yeah.
Like in transportation, they sit right behind me.
To
So
be honest with you, Megan, and in general, it's not, I printed, apologies, I have not printed
Yeah,
something in a very long time because.
it's on the website, so we can see it.
So it's not an imperative that.
And we do have-
the screen. Yeah, and it's pretty minor. So anyway, again, thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today. I'm not sure where you're at in this conversation, so apologies in advance if my
We're in the
testimony.
learning stages
Very
is what we
beginning.
are.
If my testimony is not meeting the moment, I guess what I wanted to do in terms of following up on the really great testimony that you heard from the Agency of Natural Resources, supported by the really important work of the Agency of Transportation. We can move past that one, Megan. Thank you. Is just to sort of set a high level frame about the role of this program in Vermont's climate and affordability efforts, as well as how we came to recommend the program as a core recommendation of the Climate Action Plan. So just want to talk a little bit about that process. So, as you know well, and you just heard, Vermont has a legal obligation to do its part to reduce planet warming pollution in line with the well-established targets set forth in the Paris Climate Accord that we ourselves have embraced both in the Global Warming Solutions Act and that Governor Scott himself embraced when President Trump 1.0 in 2017 said, remove the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement. So we have committed to doing our part on climate, and most importantly in Vermont, because we import all of the fossil fuels that we collectively use, this is fundamentally also a significant economic issue. So, I say that just to frame my brief remarks in a broader context, which is really about, ensuring Vermonters are not left behind in a global clean energy transition. The Advanced Clean Cars program, the components of it, as you've heard, we've been in this program. This is the next evolution of pretty much almost 3 decades worth of participation to help Vermonters save money by accessing and affording cleaner, more efficient vehicles. So, I think this program is really fundamental to the United States and Vermont, not only continuing to compete in an innovating global marketplace, but it's also fundamental to the economic and kitchen table issues that Vermont households and businesses are facing. So just to contextualize, this is a little bit of a repeat of what you've already seen and likely well know, but transportation, the single most carbon intensive sector in our state. Next slide, please, Megan. I'm so sorry you have to do this. And you saw a different slide from the ANR team, but this is really just to underscore in a visual provided by the Energy Action Network, undergirded by the data provided by our state agencies, that the lifetime cost savings of switching to an electric vehicle are significant. The estimated savings on fuel and maintenance over the lifetime of the vehicle being about $9,500, and the avoided social costs from reduced fuel-related greenhouse gas emissions over the life of vehicle about $7,000. We have talked about,
the need to sort of defray the upfront costs. And I'm grateful for the leadership of this legislature, our utilities, the work of our state agencies when it comes to creating incentive programs that actually meet that moment and help low-income Vermonters in particular. We've tailored our programs to drive those incentives and limited capacity and to prioritize those who carry a higher energy burden.
Quick draft, those numbers are actually very different than the ones we saw earlier.
Yeah, I was looking at that and I'm not exactly sure. I think their numbers.
Not as robust, actually, as the ones that we saw.
Yeah. I don't know. We can rationalize that.
Make sure 6,000 in fuel savings in 5 years.
Yeah.
And a vehicle actually may last 20 years. I drive them till they're, you know, see through them. Once I get one.
Yes.
Because
it looks like this is from the Federal Highway Administration. We can check
Yeah, this seems very low compared to what.
Yeah. I took note of that as well. So I will work with the talented team at the ANR and VTrans to sort of grapple with rationalizing those numbers. Next slide, please, Megan. So I really wanted to speak to, again, I'm not sure where you're at in this conversation, but the role of transportation in the climate action plan. Again, being a little bit redundant, transportation climate pollution is about 40% of where our climate pollution comes from. That is largely because we are a very rural state, and we have, I have come to learn working closely with our community action agencies over time. This is really an epiphany for me, decades ago when they sort of spoke to the importance of owning a vehicle or having access to a vehicle to be able to access and maintain a job. So get them where they need to go and get them to their job in particular. So in Vermont, transforming transportation, vehicles are a core component of that. As we move to diversifying and creating more options for getting people where they need to go in rural Vermont, vehicles that are more clean and cost effective, AKA electric vehicles, are really critical. So next slide, please, Megan. So just speaking to a little bit of the process, as you heard from Jane and Rachel, when the Climate Council was stood up, it created a framework to focus the work on mitigation, adaptation, resilience, and a just transition. There are 5 subcommittees of the Climate Council. I serve on the cross-sector subcommittee, which is the subcommittee that is focused on the energy sectors of transportation, thermal, buildings, heating and cooling, power, the electric sector, and the industrial process sector. So really, like, the lion's share of where the pollution comes from is what happens in the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee. There is also a real resilience and adaptation subcommittee, agriculture and ecosystem subcommittee, a science and data subcommittee, which undergirds our data and analysis, and a just transition subcommittee, which is really critical to all of our thinking, both on the Climate Council and as a broader state, about how do we make this transition in a way that brings everyone along and enables them to benefit, afford, and participate in the inevitable transition that we are underway. So really quickly, just stay really quickly back, sorry. The Transportation Task Group is a subset, oh my gosh, Megan, I'm so sorry, is a subset of the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee. This is a lot of work done by a lot of really talented state agency staff and volunteers and experts in their own arena. The Transportation Task Group, the entity that came up with recommending the Advanced Clean Cars program and Advanced Clean Trucks, has been comprised of a handful of state agency staff, businesses, low-income representatives, rural reps, data and environmental representatives. So leading up to the adoption of the Climate Action Plan in December of 2021, the task group really sort of got to work looking broadly at transportation, met incrementally and then more consistently, leading up to a recommendation that we put forward in terms of the initial set of strategies outlined in the Climate Action Plan. Now, next slide. As we did that work and as the Climate Council has analyzed its recommendations writ large, we created a prioritization framework rubric, really crediting the state Climate Action Office for this important rubric that enables us to look at, when we are making recommendations, what are the impacts of those recommendations, meaning how many greenhouse gas emissions will a particular recommendation reduce? That is a core component of the Global Warming Solutions Act, as you know. And at the same time, we know that that is not the only metric that we need to measure as we make a transition that brings people along, supports our economy, and makes it affordable for everyone to participate. So we went through and screened each of our recommendations through this 5-part analysis of impact, equity, co-benefits, cost effectiveness, and technical feasibility. And I can deliver some of this in writing. I don't necessarily need to use your time, but I mean, have more detailed analysis pulled from the initial climate action plan that sort of speaks to our rationalization for that when it comes to the Advanced Car program and the Advanced Clean Trucks program, which, as you know, was a core recommendation. Next slide, please. The results of our work when it comes to this particular program that you're discussing today is that the Advanced Clean Cars 2 program, Advanced Clean Trucks, is key to achieving our emissions reductions in the transportation sector. It is fundamental and foundational. It is the only priority and high impact recommendation in the 2021 Climate Action Plan that has moved forward. The other two big priorities, and I think Jane mentioned one, was the Clean Heat Standard, which is a thermal performance standard for the building sector, akin to what we have done in the electric sector with appliance efficiency and other efficiency measures in the electric sector. So that was intended to tackle thermal. That was the number one most significant recommendation. And then the Transportation and Climate Initiative was also a core recommendation that unfortunately cratered just a couple of weeks, a week, right before we adopted the Climate Action Plan. And that was intended to be a complementary policy to drive, sort of pollution reduction and raise revenue to reinvest and complement the incentives that we have already in the programs that we've already created. So just underscoring, and high impact, I just want to let you know, is defined as getting the state to more than 10% of the way towards meeting our emissions reductions targets. So just underscoring the import of this program in both, achieving our greenhouse gas emissions, but also reducing the costs for Vermonters as they have to drive to get where they need to go. And you heard some really great testimony from the A&R team, but I don't need to reiterate, but just the import and the opportunity that we have before us to maintain our sort of compliance and participation in this program. Next slide, please, Megan. And I guess I just want to end with, I'm not sure if you're taking up a bill. I know there was a bill introduced in the House to sort of repeal the program. That would remove the opportunity to partner with the sort of like 17 other states. And, it would really be a significant deviation from where we have been for 2 decades plus. And I just would say that preemptively sort of removes flexibility, and I would argue opportunity. It is my understanding that President Trump and the new administration is probably going to target this program anyway. So I would hope, that Vermont sort of stays the course. This program has delivered really beneficial results for Vermonters, and Vermonters into cleaner, more cost-effective vehicles is fundamental. It's a fundamental sort of purview of this particular program. And without it, I feel like we are, as they say, cutting off our nose to spite our face. So there may be efforts afoot at the federal level. So it is my proactive urging to you all to, this is a really foundational program for a variety of reasons. So, my hope that Vermont stays the course, remains consistent. I also just note that I have seen some of the sort of outreach from the Alliance for Auto Manufacturers and others. And what I understand as an organization that is affiliated with other national organizations, that this is part of a orchestrated and organized effort nationally. I just fear it's an attempt to slow, scare, stall, and stymie the inevitable transition, which, as this last slide I will show you again, in the theme of cutting off our nose to spite our face, the world is moving in this direction. So, Goldman Sachs, I'm not like a proponent necessarily, but we literally have some of the largest economic entities out there saying that this is the future. Clearly, China and other countries are leaning into it. I think it's really incumbent upon states to continue to lean in and make sure that we are not left behind, that we are not leaving people behind, and that the more cost-effective, cleaner options, especially in a state that imports all of the fossil fuels that power our internal combustion engines and diesel trucks, it's really an economic issue. So again, I don't know where you are in this conversation. I'm happy to come back and provide more testimony. You've heard great testimony from ANR and B-Trans. If you do go further and there is an effort to repeal, my hope is that you actually, that you hear from other experts, including NESCOM. You mentioned the New England States Committee on Air Use Management, I think, NESCOM. So entities that work at the national level and on state level policies, other experts like Drive Electric Vermont. So if you do consider, that would be a big and significant retreat and pivot from where we have been and ultimately where I think the future is heading. And it's my hope that we would take this very seriously and not consider doing something without very significant reasons. So I really appreciate, I think that the ANR team did the hard work of like laying the foundation, all the due diligence that we really leaned into in terms of making a recommendation that we are going to continue to lean into in terms of advocating for the maintenance of this program.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Thanks for your patience with the technical issues as well.
That's fine. So thank you. All right, we're not scheduled for anything further until 11. So we might.
Our committee's done for.
Okay, we're done. So team
Easy.
SNR, we're gonna